Supervisor Coyer?
Here.
Councilman Barber?
Here.
Councilman Carter?
Here.
Councilman Tolowski?
Here.
Councilman Barron?
Yes.
Okay, so welcome, everyone. This is our special meeting before our regular meeting. We have our guest speaker, Aaron Zeman from the APA, and
Take it away.
take it away.
Take it away.
It's all you.
Cool. Well, thanks for having me today. And so Joey came and saw a presentation I gave to the Adirondack Park Agency Board in February, looking at kind of how the process went for 8 of the lakes in the Adirondacks that treated with Priscillachlor last year in 2024. So after seeing that presentation, and you mentioned that Shazy had some inkling of some idea of possibly going down this path of looking into Priscillachlor, asked me to invited me to come.
Yeah, I was really impressed with the overall depth of the knowledge and work they put into this, understanding what we're doing to all the lakes, especially Lake George. I mean, if you think a lake's got their eyes on, it's Lake George, and you know, they did it. And then I'm so glad that Mary's here tonight, because you know, Chateau Lake is another lake that's had great success with it, and so we can use her also as a resource. But I was just impressed by Aaron's presentation. It was to the point. It was facts. It wasn't something in the clouds. And I said, man, we really got to get him to come down to Shazy Lake and just educate our community about what they found with the Priscillachlor treatment plan.
So I just want to emphasize that I'm not here to proselytize. I'm not here to sell anything, and you know, I'm just a bureaucratic wonk in the Adirondack Park Agency who reviews this kind of stuff. So we have had a lot of interest in these sorts of projects, obviously, and so just a couple of factors about how it looks on our end when we're reviewing these things, what we need to see, and then just how the treatments have been proceeding along the line of as they've been rolling out for the last couple of years. So I do have a presentation for you, but you know, feel free to jump in with questions or conversation anywhere along the way. Some of this is similar to what I did in February, but also just tried to give a bit of an overview of Priscillachlor itself, just basic FAQs, that kind of thing. So, so I am Aaron Zeman. I'm a project analyst at the Adirondack Park Agency, and so for the last 3 years I've been working through these Priscillachlor projects. So this is just a little overview of what I'll talk about today, just basics of invasive species and treating invasive species. What are the management options for the region 1 milfoil? The chemical profile of Priscillachlor, fluoroperoxyphene benzol is the name of the active ingredient. And then just kind of a quick touch on some of the treatments in the Adirondack Park that we've seen over the last couple of years. I went over 8 of them in February. I think I've got 3 of them in here. Just to look at some of the specifics. And then some of those permitting requirements.
What does EC mean after the Priscillachlor?
That's a great question. I don't know what the EC stands for, only to differentiate it from a different formulation of the same project called SC, I believe. But EC is the product that has been used.
So Priscillachlor is not really the name of the chemical itself.
That's the trade name of the product that's created by Cipro. But the active ingredient is fluoroperoxyphene benzol.
Okay.
Which nobody says. So.
I haven't heard of that.
So, invasive species. This definition came from Executive Order 13122 of the Clinton administration, which established the National Invasive Species Council and provided this definition. Species non-native to an ecosystem whose introduction causes or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. Are we familiar with any of these pictures?
All of them.
Mm-hmm.
All of them. We got the emerald ash borer who's hemming in on from all angles onto the Adirondack Park. Phragmites, yeah. Next to that,
Purple loose.
purple loosestrife. Below that,
Japanese knotweed.
Japanese knotweed, which is flowering everywhere right now. Well, not flowering, it's starting to pop out.
Lanternfly.
Spotted lanternfly. here just yet. And then,
Hemlock, Willie Village.
Hemlock Lily Village, exactly.
That's not too pervasive yet in the Adirondacks.
It hasn't made it super far north yet. It's in the southern part of the park and Lake George area, and then coming up around Sacandaga area. But so the problem there is that cold temperatures have tended to knock it down, but the temperatures aren't getting as cold as they used to be. So invasive spread. Yeah, so those are some invasive species, but not the one we're here to talk about. The Eurasian water milfoil is Myriophyllum spiccatum. Present in numerous lakes in the Adirondacks. Native to Europe, Asia, and North Africa. Arrived in the States in the 40s, most likely. And in the Adirondacks, probably in the 70s. The 70s, what did I just see in the 70s? Eagle Lake first saw it in the 1970s. Has broad environmental tolerances to depth, pH, temperature, and turbidity, so it can grow in a lot of different conditions in a lot of different places. Nothing native eats it. It isn't a preferred food of any local native species. It can reproduce by seed, but the way that it really reproduces is by autofragmentation. So these fragments at the height of the growing season spontaneously pop off the plant, and all of those become viable fragments that can.
Moose don't like to eat this at all?
I haven't heard of moose liking to eat this, but I don't know that moose would dip in and say no to anything. I'm not sure. My understanding is it's not a preferred food source for most anything that's native here, which is also part of the definition of an invasive. One of the reasons that they can get such a toehold is there's no natural predators. So left unchecked, a nice bed of native plants where the sunlight's streaming through, and there's light getting through to the bottom of the sediment of the lake. You've got places for predator species to hide, or for prey species to hide and predator species to hide and ambush. It is a natural community where everything that's living there is doing what it's supposed to do. But very quickly, that can be transformed into something that looks like that. Monoculture of Eurasian water milfoil, with the plant grows thickly at the surface and tops off and forms a canopy, which prevents sunlight from penetrating deep into the water column, chokes out other vegetation. And because there's one species present, when that dies and it's time to die during the year, there's a lot of biomass dying at the same time that can cause water quality issues. Obviously, recreation in waters like that is not fun. Just try fishing it. So this, has anybody seen this image before? This is kind of the standard 101 of the curve of invasive species. So a small population coming in at the beginning is the best time to get your eyes on that thing and control it. So try all of your prevention methodologies, your boat stewards, your getting the education and the public awareness out about invasive species. Those things can prevent the introduction in the first place, but once it's there, you're into eradication. If it continues and continues to grow, you're into trying to contain that, because eradication isn't going to be possible anymore with too many fingers going out in different directions. And then even more time goes along, and you're in a long-term management phase. So most of the lake associations that we're dealing with are in this long-term management phase. You've already been dealing with it for 30, 40 years. It's on the landscape. Nothing you're going to do in a single action is going to take care of it for once and for all. But you're in this long-term phase where you're just, all the tools that are possible to grab onto are worth looking into. And that's sort of this long-term phase that most of the lake associations that we've been working with are in now. So this picture on the left is Brant Lake. The one on the top is suction harvesting, and on the bottom is a boat steward at a boat wash station. So impacted lake communities in our region have been fighting Eurasian water milfoil for decades. So it's important to people. Controlling it's important to people, not only because of the documented impact that milfoil infestations can have on native habitats, but also because of the impact on swimming and boating, water property, values fishing, but also because people have seen substantial changes in short periods of time. These populations can fluctuate, but if you lived someplace before the milfoil was there, and you're still living there now, you can see that change happen quickly. There's a new player on the landscape. And that kind of rapid change inspires concern. A 2014 study by APIC, the Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program, indicated that regionally invasive species volunteers provided more than 12,000 annual volunteer hours and valued at more than $700,000 annually. But again, most have come to the realization that established milfoil infestations need long-term management. So for the agency's purposes, because all of these management options involve wetlands, the agency is obligated to review the potential adverse impacts associated with them and to weigh those potential impacts against the benefits that they provide. So our charge in these reviews is to protect the resources of the Adirondack Park. So from the agency's perspective on jurisdiction, our focus is on the wetland, the Deepwater Marsh wetland that the milfoil just happens to be in. And will the actions proposed have a negative impact on the wetland as a whole? And if it will have a negative impact on the wetland, will those impacts be outweighed by the net benefit of restoring that wetland by getting the milfoil out of there? So those are some of the calculus that we need to consider as we're looking at permit application review. So there's lots of treatment options, and I haven't dug deep into the Chazy Lake history, but I know you've been hand harvesting for years. I don't know what other options necessarily have come down the pike and that you've actually employed, but if you do put an application in, you'll be telling me all about those things. So there's lots of treatment options and several methodologies that all have come to the agency for permitting purposes because they involve wetlands over the last several decades. All of these are also detailed in the Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program's Invasive Species Best Management Practices document, which is a pretty good read for those who like that kind of thing.
Is that at your site?
I'm sorry?
Is that on your site?
Look at APIC, Adirondack Park.
Oh, yes, you said that, thanks.
Yep. We should link to it though. But it's important to recognize that any of these methods have benefits and they have drawbacks. Nobody wants to be doing treatment for urine water milfoil. So the first of these, hand harvesting and diver-assisted suction harvesting. I assume this is what you've done a lot of on Chazy Lake. Are you doing DASH as well?
Yes.
The diver-assisted suction harvest?
We have our own boat too.
You've got your own?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's the most commonly used management tool in the Adirondacks. Can be really effective in eradicating small populations, but can be more difficult in, and can also be effective in containing larger populations. So not eradicating the big ones, but maybe just putting a fence around it so you can, concentrate on individual areas. Suction harvesting is not always selective because you're down there with a vacuum hose and you're getting anything that goes into it. Especially in dense beds with multiple species present. It can be difficult to locate and manage those smaller populations, which can then rebound and expand, and the harvester can sometimes create turbidity issues.
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
Someone mentioned to me that, I noticed there was algae blooms in Chazy Lake that hadn't been there before. This amorphic cloud of gunk that formed on the bottom. And someone mentioned to me, I didn't know if it was accurate, that the dash was causing the algae bloom because it was spreading nutrients throughout the water that weren't there originally. Is that what's your feeling about that?
It doesn't sound right to me.
Well, they remind them of just gossip,
Yeah. So what you're doing when you're removing nutrients, when you're removing plant material, and especially with dash, you're sucking it up onto the deck of the boat and then disposing of it somewhere else. So you're taking biological material out of the system. So it doesn't seem like there's a connection necessarily. Benthic barriers, are familiar with these? They've kind of gone by the wayside in recent years because they're not selective. It's like putting a tarp down on your backyard is gonna kill anything underneath it on the grass. Same thing on the bottom of a lake. It'll kill anything underneath the barrier, target or non-target species alike. And it's not very effective for larger infestations, small spots. Mechanical harvesting, using basically a giant mower to chop down and remove some biomass, which can get rid of the problem of stuff topping off at the surface of your lake, but it doesn't get rid of the problem of dirty water level. It's still there. And you've just created a lot of fragments in mowing that down. And obviously it's not selective either. And then chemical management can be very effective in suppressing or containing larger infestations because you're applying to a larger area. The selectivity varies by chemical, and there definitely are potential non-target impacts you need to consider. And it reduces the population to a level that allows for more cost-effective long-term management elsewhere on a lake. And that's what we've heard over and over again from lake associations is we want to get a leg up on it. We want to hit these large infestations so we can send our divers over to all these other spots we haven't been able to hit because they've been spending time on these large infestations. So that's really the biggest piece that people have been looking for. Not eradication, but we're trying to get a leg up on this. So agency staff and the agency board have reviewed and issued permits for 12 proposed treatments involving chemical management with Priscilla-Chlor, beginning with Minerva Lake in 2020. And in each of those reviews, the agency reached the conclusions of law necessary for approval, in most cases involving value 1 wetland, the most highly valued wetland rating in the agency regulations.
So Aaron, did I hear you say that Priscilla-Chlor has only been used in the Adirondacks starting 2020?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And it's only been available since 2019. Priscilla-Chlor is relatively new on the market.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Now, I have a question related to this too. What I've heard is that when you treat a lake, that it destroys every spot of milfoil throughout the entire lake. Now, is that accurate, or does it kill 90% or 80%?
Well, I'll show you a couple, towards the end I'll show you some charts with plant survey data, but it's not 100% accurate, no. Each one of these had some residual milfoil somewhere in the system, and whether it's because the herbicide didn't make it to that area, whether it's because it's far away from where the treatment zone actually was. In some cases, there's dilution coming in from a stream, so if you treat right at the stream mouth, it's diluting the chemical and you're not getting as much impact on the stuff that's right there.
Now, when you do a big lake, do you target just one spot, or do you do multiple spots?
Well, that'll be something that you'll want to be discussing with,
It
ideally with
depends
the
on how
certified
deep
lake
your
manager.
pockets are.
I'm sorry?
It depends on how deep your pockets are.
Well, it does cost money. There's consultants involved. It costs money to do your hand harvesting every year too. But I can't stress enough to get coordinated with a good certified lake manager, somebody who can walk you through the process and help you strategize what your goals are, get those very clear, and what your strategy is for making it to those goals. It's important to have that up front.
Quick question, maybe I'm jumping ahead. Any negative effects on marine life?
Priscilla-Chlor itself does not impact anything other than the
So
plants.
eagles are feeding on the fish, it doesn't affect the birds of prey?
Does not affect fish, does not affect birds, does not bioaccumulate like some chemicals do. So I'll get into a slide. I have a slide coming up soon about the toxicity ratings of it that are all very, very, very low.
I heard some gossip. The person who put my dock in works on Chattagay Lake, and he said he's found lots of dead fish from the Priscilla-Chlor. But I also heard that, no fish were killed, so I don't know what he was talking about specifically, but.
Yeah, we've had from some of the lakes people calling up afterwards with, I saw a dead fish, or I saw a couple of dead fish. but really with no evidence one way or the other that it's caused by the treatment.
Okay.
And certainly you see dead fish regularly. The toxicology of it is very clear that it does not impact fish.
Now, what about drinking? Because people drink, water out of Shazy Lake.
Yep, got a slide on that coming
Yeah.
up too.
Yeah,
There are no restrictions.
If we could keep the questions to the end if possible, because we have another meeting after this, so.
What time?
Well, typically we start at 5, but I realize that you're being held up, so.
I'm sorry.
Keep it down a bit.
Yeah.
So, all these methods are all valid and they're all part of the toolbox for managing the regional water flow. So what is Priscillabor? And this is going to get into the nuts and bolts of some of your questions there. It's a selective systemic herbicide. It's selective because only a limited number of plant species are sensitive to the active ingredient, which means there's limited non-target impacts. It's systemic because it's rapidly absorbed by the plant and distributed throughout the plant's stem, leaves, and roots in 2 to 6 hours after contact time. And it's effective at very low doses. Less than 8 parts per billion is the standard dosage rate. For a sense of the scale we're talking about, note that 1 part per billion is equal to roughly 3 seconds in a century. A pinch of salt and 10 tons of potato chips. Or my favorite, 1 sheet in the toilet paper roll stretching from New York to London. So this is a very, very small quantity of actual active ingredient that is applied. And what doesn't get taken up by the plants breaks down really quickly through a process called photolysis. So the light energy hits the residual chemical that's floating around in the water and breaks it down into its components very quickly. How does it do all this? It's not a poison, it's an artificial plant growth hormone. So it mimics a plant growth hormone that causes uncontrolled rapid growth that ultimately kills the plant. So imagine you're going through a growth spurt and it just doesn't stop. And your cells pop open, explode, and you're done, you're toast. So the leaves grow larger, become twisted, stems lengthen, the tissue becomes fragile, and this happens in hours to days with death and decomposition within 2 to 3 weeks. Plant fragments are not viable after they've been treated, and it's applied early in the growing season as they emerge to have the most effective uptake of the product.
Is there a best month for application of?
We've been limiting it to the end of June, so May or June is where you're looking. Eurasian water milfoil tends to emerge sooner than other native plants, so the hope is by getting it early, you further limit the non-target impacts to other plants that are up. But yeah, May to June is the treatment window. So EPA approved the registration in 2018 at the federal level. In Europe, the European Union approved it for agricultural use in 2019, and DEC issued an approval in early 2019 that included reviews from Department of Health, Division of Fish and Wildlife, and concluded with the statement that the product application was fully reviewed regarding human health as well as ecosystem health, and there were no objections to registration of the product. Additionally, Health Canada Pest Management issued their own approval in 2022. And as quoted from that document, when used according to label directions, fluoroperoxyfen benzoyl and its transformation products do not pose a risk to wild mammals, birds, beneficial invertebrates, earthworms, bees, aquatic invertebrates, fish, amphibians, or algae.
Can you hold that slide for a second? I want to write down the
Well, we're videotaping it, so you'll be able to see it.
chemical. The fluoro.
I can give you FLORPYRAUXIFEN. Here's that product degradation and the toxicity stuff. The product's applied by a hose, injected beneath the surface of the water directly to the target milfoil bed. Rapid uptake time. Let's see, this is the half-life of Priscillacor in aerobic and anaerobic conditions, and the pressures are absolute. What all this means is that between rapid uptake and very fast breakdown of the herbicide that doesn't get taken up by the plants, the herbicide doesn't stick around for very long. And neither do the metabolites, or the products that it breaks down into. EPA concluded that the products that Priscillacor breaks down into after it's broken down either by light energy or by the plants themselves are up to 11,000 times less toxic than the parent chemical. So we're already showing that fluoroperoxyfen benzoyl is practically non-toxic or slightly toxic to different categories of living things, but the products that it breaks down into are tens of thousands of times less toxic than those. And there's the chart showing the toxicity testing related to fish, invertebrates, birds, mammals, reptiles. Practically non-toxic is a defined term for EPA. It sounds like you're couching your words into special lawyer terms, but it's a defined term. It's the lowest possible value assigned. And somewhat toxic, slightly toxic is the second lowest possible level in that definition. Acute toxicity from the product and its major metabolites to freshwater aquatic invertebrates and fish is low, which has a lot to do with the product's specificity as a plant hormone. Fish, birds don't have the receptors for those hormones to be even affected by the material. Also note that all of these toxicity ratings are at levels that are far higher than would ever be applied in a lake. Less than 8 parts per billion, and they're doing this toxicity modeling at far higher rates than that. The maximum treatment concentration, 7.72 parts per billion. No chemical-specific federal or New York State drinking water standards, because there are no demonstrated concerns for human health. Therefore, the New York State registration uses a default restriction for any unspecified organic contaminant at 50 parts per billion. Again, that's far greater than you would ever see in a lake environment after an application. There's no swimming or fishing restrictions except during the actual product application, and that's just to stay out of the way of the boat. There are irrigation restrictions in place to avoid possible non-target impacts to your decorative plants, but the restriction doesn't apply to grass watering because it does not affect grass. Similarly, there's livestock watering restrictions. I don't know if anybody's got livestock on Shazy Lake, but that restriction's in place not because of impacts to the livestock, but because the material could go through the digestive tract and then come out the other end and harm your ornamental plants. So the permit application process, for our purposes, I think the big thing you need to know is to get everything done early. And there are steps that need to be taken in the season prior to any possible permit being issued. The application process requires a staff site visit during the height of the growing season prior to a treatment. So if you wanted to treat next year, you need to get out in July or August of this year to take a look at the conditions on the lake. Also a pre-treatment plant survey. So you would hire a professional to do a plant survey of the lake, of the treatment areas, and there's a specific methodology in our application materials to show us everything that's growing in the locations where the treatment would take place. And then post-treatment, after a permit's issued and after you undertake the project, there's a requirement for a repeat of the plant survey, so we can see a before and after snapshot. What happened to the milfoil, what happened to the other native species. Herbicide residual results. So all of these projects also require a permit from DEC. for the Division of Pesticides permit. And part of that process requires implementation of a monitoring plan to assess the concentration levels of the herbicide in the water after the application is complete. So I'll show you here. So this is Chateauguay Lake on the Narrows, the treatment that was undertaken last year. So the area in yellow were the treatment locations, and the area in blue is the dilution zone. So it's a model, so essentially what we're saying here is that if the entire 25 gallons of product to be used for the treatment were distributed evenly across the entirety of the yellow and blue zones, the total volume of herbicide in that water would be less than 1 part per billion. So it's based on models which establish the area where public water use restrictions would apply, and then once the herbicide's applied, monitoring stations within those areas to make sure that the residual is dropping down and those restrictions can be lifted.
Quick question.
Sure.
When you apply the chemical, what if you're in 10 feet of water and what if you're in 50 feet of water? How do you get the chemical down to the depths versus on the surface?
Well, the Eurasian water milfoil is not going to be growing in 50 feet of water, but it can get down to 15 to 20. They've got a drop hose that sits behind the back of the boat, and they just go back and forth over the treatment area, and most of those are within more shallow zones, and the depth of that can be adjusted.
Does milfoil only grow where the sunlight can hit it?
Exactly, within the littoral zone, where the sun can reach it. If it's deeper water, it's
The Shazy Lake, the water's so clear though that it does grow in deep. I mean, not 50 feet, but it does grow in
goes deeper.
deep, yeah.
So that's again another consideration when you talk about your application. Yeah, so just some details about the Chateauguay project.
Is that continuing, Chateauguay? Is that still going on?
Well, they did one treatment last year in the Narrows, and they've got an application in this year for treatment in the Upper Lake. So they've got a 5-year adaptive management plan that has all of their treatment areas laid out very clearly, in a very organized fashion, and they know where they want to go year to year over the next 5-year period. But they also built into that plan the adaptability to be able to shift if conditions change. This treatment area is not accessible, we'll go over to this area, or we can get a lot of growth this season over here, we can move over to this area. So really having that plan solid and built up front is to your benefit. So this is the post-treatment monitoring of the residual after the treatment was undertaken. And you can see, so the treatment was undertaken on the 28th. Residual was only seen at one site on the day of treatment and the day after treatment, and at one other site on the day of treatment. So after that point, it was non-detectable. After 3 days, it was no longer detectable in the water column. This is a big deal. 10 years ago, if you were talking about chemical herbicide treatments, you're talking about maintaining levels of concentration of the chemical for like a month or longer, and needing to set up sequestration curtains and a much more in-depth process for, and then having those water usage restrictions for long periods of time as well. So this was a big step forward. Looking at the plant surveys from Chateauguay, what did the survey show? The authorized representative and the plant survey team from Adirondack Research, who's an outfit out of Saranac Lake, both confirmed that Eurasian water milfoil was successfully controlled within the treatment areas. I say successfully, but not 100%. There were still some remnant pieces here and there, which gives you an idea of where you're going to hand harvest first next year. The metric here is percent occurrence, that is of 206 survey sites sampled, how frequently did those species show up. There were also anticipated non-target impacts to some species, all of which have been on the list of potentially susceptible species from the beginning of agency's review of these types of projects, including water shield and water stargrass that had the largest declines. But there were other non-target impacts that were anticipated that were not seen, or were so uncommon, or of species that were so uncommon in the treatment area to begin with that fluctuations up or down didn't seem all that notable, including 2 species of native milfoils. Another example, this is Paradox Lake. So the treatment areas were the blue and the yellow area here. The dilution zone is in the purple hatched areas. And they did residual monitoring in all these orange triangle locations. And only had a residual concentration picked up at one station 10 hours after the treatment. And then from that point on, it was non-detectable.
When the plant dies at the bottom of the lake, does it completely disappear, or does it become a layer of sediment, or what?
Both. I've got a video that'll show at the tail end here of a before and after shots. You can see kind of what that looks like. I'll try to zip through these a little faster here. The plant species, okay, so this was actually what I want to point out is this one here. This is showing the frequency of occurrence for 2002, 22, 23, and 24 of native species. On the left of the milfoil species, and actually you can see that over here too, they had over 2 years a bloom, a blossom, massive uptick in Eurasian water milfoil. And then after the treatment, that plummeted right back down. But you see here, the milfoil plummeted down after the treatment, but the total numbers of all species, now native species, are the same as previously. So in the absence of milfoil, it's native species taking the place of milfoil that's been eradicated.
So it sort of chokes it out.
It kills the milfoil and then out-competes it. Because that's the hallmark of invasive species, is that they out-compete everything. This is the leg up. And then this one was one of the Lake George sites, and again, after 12 hours after treatment, the concentrations just were not detectable. And again, in Lake George, Sheep Meadow Bay, Eurasian water milfoil went down to 2.5% of the sites from 25% the previous year. We actually saw an uptick in one of the species that is susceptible, and a slight downtick in the native milfoil. And with that small level of fluctuation, counting, saying that that's because of the herbicide is a difficult connection to make. So our conclusions, Priscillocor is effective against Eurasian water milfoil. That's very clear. The residual concentration monitoring shows that the product isn't detected after 3 days and it degrades as anticipated. The non-target impacts are consistent with expectations. And we're seeing native species take over these locations where Eurasian water milfoil once was dominant. And this last one I can't stress enough, licensed professional applicators are vital to the process. To strategically apply the product with treatment day conditions in mind. So having this all up front in a clear and concise package so we see what you're doing is all well and good, but if there's 30-mile-an-hour winds on the day of treatment, well, you probably shouldn't be out there, but taking those pieces into effect, into mind. We do have some videos for you. These were taken by Nick Roll of the Warren County Soil and Water Conservation District, who was involved in the treatment in Lake George. This is in one of the Lake George sites, probably in about 15 feet of water, swimming over in the milfoil bed, pre-treatment. It's a lot better with sound because you sound like Darth Vader.
our divers see, our dash divers?
All the time,
That's
yeah.
what they're down there yanking. But this has gotta be like July, August, cause it's so tall?
This would have been, that's a great question. I think this was pre-treatment on the same year, this was last year. So
That's
this
gotta be
would have
June?
been May or June,
Okay.
mid-June. So they did this in late June.
Can you imagine how big it is in August?
This video is amazing. This is what really like, wow. When you see the pre and then post, it's just night and day.
Post-treatment.
Wow.
So this is a lot of native species. This is Potamogeton amplifolius, or bassweed.
That's unbelievable.
That was growing in the milfoil bed?
Underneath the canopy.
Oh, okay.
In a few minutes, we're gonna float over a large spot that looked like it was a monoculture. So, we're talking about dieback after adding Priscillacor. What I'm hearing technicians talk about is just, it gets evaporated. You can see the long stems of it, yeah.
Yeah, that's what just was amazing me right there.
It's completely toast.
Disintegrated.
And the native species growing up in it. So.
What is the
That's what it looks like.
opposition to this? What's the propaganda on the other side about how dangerous it is? I mean, because I've heard people tell me this is absolutely horrible and it shouldn't be done and you're poisoning yourself and.
Well, we've got a long history of screwing up herbicides and pesticides as people, thinking that they're silver bullets, and then
Yeah.
it turns out to be something dramatically terrible.
I've read a couple things, and correct me if I'm wrong, it really looks like it's doing the job, but when you talk about the opposite things, the things that I've read is, do they have the forever chemicals? Does it sink into the sediment, and is the sediment being measured, and who's doing the research? And that's a question I have for you, it's, because it's not Priscillacor that's doing the research, correct? It's like independent places.
Well, it's the EPA and
Right.
the DEC and the Canadian government, and so all of these organizations that need to register the product. I'm certain that when I don't know, DDT was first put down, did not have 12 years of development and
That's a good
testing.
point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To
They
the
found no tumors on anything or
right.
any animal or any person or.
All of the background testing that happened for the registration process came to those conclusions. And no. What I will say about PFAS, the forever chemicals, I think, well, first of all, they were linked to Priscillacor in a document in Minnesota, and let me just cut to the quick.
Yeah.
It's not.
Okay, okay.
If it was a forever chemical, it would be here forever, and it's disappearing in 3 days.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not a concern. And the other was in the sediment, was the other piece.
Yes.
Yeah, so those pieces that the Priscillacor breaks down into are, like I said, thousands of times less toxic than the original component, the original chemical. And they can linger longer, the byproducts can linger longer, but they're not toxic. So
So it's a moot point then?
it's somewhat of a moot point, yes. But that being said, there are people looking into it. I know the Jefferson Project in Lake George are doing work, studying the sediment work, the benthic layer, and I haven't seen any of that reporting yet.
Thank you.
Aaron, of the 8 lakes that have been approved in the Adirondack Park, from your knowledge of Shazy Lake, which one is the most similar?
I gotta tell you, I don't have a lot of knowledge of Shady Lake.
Okay.
I know it's a
That's
deepish lake. It
That's
gets 80 feet, something like that.
Mhm.
Yep,
And
spring fed.
that's a good question.
Okay.
I wouldn't
It's a special cold water fishery, and at the very bottom, cold water doesn't turn over. There's a name for it, starts with a O.
Olotrophic?
The olotrophic.
So
It
lower
doesn't,
levels
it's so
of
cold, it
nutrients.
doesn't turn over.
Right.
And so that's why there's a strong lake trout population and so forth.
I will say the one common thing I see among all the lakes is that the people involved in them are pretty sure that theirs is the best. So
As we are sure.
what I've learned is, yeah, people love their lakes for sure.
What's the largest spot you actually treated as far as acres or just feet or?
The biggest, probably Grant Lake had the largest total acreage wise in 6 or 7 different treatment zones totaling upwards of 100 acres.
Wow, wow.
But they target a lot of spots. And a big lake too.
Is it clear now? I mean, is there still milfoil there in a big way, or is it?
Their reporting showed that it had major reductions. Still some stray stems here and there, but major reductions. And getting to your question previously, some of the hand harvesting divers on that lake were hand harvesting other locations and saw some reductions in other places as well. Not sure that that's related to the herbicide treatment or weather conditions or something else, but yes, they're noticing big reductions down there.
Devil's advocate question, because I'm a cynic when I think of Roundup, when I think opiates, I'm addictive, all of that, you know what I mean? So, but it seems to be doing the trick, and there's certainly all kinds of research behind it, but when they talk about 90-something% of the ingredients are not released to the public, then I go, what is that about? Is that like a patent, or is that an excuse, or that, you know what I'm saying?
Right, I think it largely has to do with patents.
Okay.
And what's the word I'm looking for?
Proprietary.
Trade secrets or proprietary information, yes, exactly. But that being said, the entities that were doing the reviews and everything were aware of everything that's in them.
Oh, okay.
So